the question before us today is, did the Marshall Court ultimately make the United States Constitution a stronger or weaker part of our country? All right. Yep. All right. Go for it.
Okay, I have a claim that to start off with. I think that it made the idea of the Constitution and the document stronger, and that he put more significance into it, but he made the specific words in it weaker because he made it more interpretable.
I agree with that. I think that many times his decisions came from, I don't really want to say his own opinion, but something that he thought was correct, and then he used the Constitution to his own advantage, finding the ways that his opinion could be constitutional or could be considered constitutional, or according to the Constitution, and he just used the words of the Constitution to his own advantage. So he therefore made it more interpretable and made the words mean more, because they could all have their own meaning.
I would,
The opposite of what you're saying.
yeah, I would argue that's the opposite, because it makes it so that there's so many different interpretations, it's not a distinct law, which to me seems weaker if it's not exact and so many different interpretations of it, that you could say that it's a totally different thing, and that seems to me that's not a strong document.
I agree. I would say that the Marshall Courts made the SCOTUS stronger and the Constitution weaker, because he essentially made the Constitution just a tool to be able to make whatever ruling he wanted to, and then the words in the Constitution wouldn't mean as much. It's just something he can use to answer.
Well, kind of going back to Izzy's point, do you think that the actual words got weaker, or do you think that the whole concept of the Constitution got weaker? Because I would argue, really along what Izzy was saying, to say that he made changes that would allow for the Constitution to adapt to new circumstances, making it stronger, yet
So, I have a question then, because there's this idea of when you separate the words from the Constitution, then how do you separate the Constitution from the Supreme Court? I feel they're kind of intertwined.
Can you say that again in a different way?
They're two different things, man.
But the Supreme Court operates on the Constitution. They interpret the Constitution, so it's kind of an extension of the Constitution of the.
So,
they only
and
interpret
that's
the Constitution because of Marbury versus Banks.
I think it's
then are you saying that without someone to interpret the Constitution doesn't hold the same kind of value, or the opposite, that
No, I get it.
okay,
I don't think the Constitution would mean anything at all if there was no one to interpret it.
right?
I
So
think
there's nothing in the big
Marshall, I
document.
think what Marshall, I don't know, I think having it be an interpretable document, not necessarily living, because it's very not easy to change the Constitution. I just think it, Marshall said, I'm pretty sure it was in Marbury, that it's meant to adapt to different situations. And that, I think, strengthens it, and having a looser reading of the words, I think strengthens it, because if you just take it at face value, it can only do so much. And I agree with Izzy's first point, I want to circle back to that, that what Izzy said was the words versus the idea of the Constitution, and I think it's almost inarguable that Marshall made the Constitution as an entity less powerful. The words I think we're disagreeing on, I think he made them more powerful by making them more broad-reaching. Yeah.
So, I was just arguing that he made it as an entity stronger. He made the idea of the Constitution stronger, because
like, I think we talked about this, that beforehand, it was like just referred to as like just another set of laws. But like it became kind of this like all-encompassing document that like is the thing we refer to always.
Yeah, I'm agreeing.
Okay.
I agree. I agree with, I think, the whole group on the idea that like the Constitution or like the Constitution in Marshall's view has more actual power because you have someone there and you have a court, which I'm not gonna make a claim on whether or not actually connected to the Constitution, that's able to actually execute this. I think that if we're gonna talk about whether the Constitution itself, though, is more powerful, not just someone's interpretation, that we have to look at the actual issues that Marshall ruled on, because we understand that he has this power, but now I think the question is there of whether the Supreme Court is actually working in favor of the Constitution and whether their issues actually uphold to it. And I think like one sort of glaring issue that they don't, that would be an argument that the actual words of the Constitution are no longer being followed, is if you look at Barron v. Baltimore, when he says that states no longer have to follow the Bill of Rights. So although that he's claiming he's on the side of the Constitution, that all of these powers, except for the specific ones enumerated in the Constitution, that states don't actually have to follow, or all of these concepts that states don't actually have to follow, I think that would be weakening the Constitution.
Well, before we get like really specifically into specific how each specific case affected the Constitution, I just want to bring it, like going to Marbury versus Madison, like the first case that we looked at, and the one that was like really instrumental in how he affected the Constitution. Marbury versus Madison, in itself allowed one entity in of government instead of all three to interpret the Constitution, saying like only the Supreme Court is the branch of government that can interpret the Constitution. And not only was it about interpreting the Constitution, but it was also about who enforces the laws of the Constitution as well. So if Congress makes a law that some might see as unconstitutional, it's the Supreme Court's decision instead of just any branch of government.
Yeah, my claim wasn't that like there isn't a broader opening for more people to interpret, to more people to like make sure that the Constitution is interpreted in the right way. I think that we're in agreement that like there are more people interpreting. My question is now, is this power actually being used, this new interpretation is there actually being used in a sense that actually makes the direct words of the Constitution more active in actual American society?
It seems to me that like the Constitution makes the Supreme Court more powerful, but I don't know if the Supreme Court makes the Constitution more powerful.
Yeah, and that's why I think we should look at particular issues.
So is there one case that you want?
Yeah, like I said, Barron v. Baltimore, which I think is another case. I'm not sure what people feel about other issues.
If we look at the board, Mr. Catton wrote a question that's a little relevant. Just like,
I did?
you guys keep in mind.
I mean, that was like the last,
Yeah.
I mean, about Barron v. Baltimore, I was surprised, and I'm pretty sure everyone was surprised, that that's what Marshall ruled based on what we know about Marshall. I don't know if I would put him into the box of liberal reading of the Constitution, because like Fletcher v. Peck and Barron v. Baltimore, like there's definitely arguments for either side whether or not he is a conservative or liberal view of the Constitution. But I think in Barron v. Baltimore, by sticking exactly to the words instead of like the spirit of the law, that was like, I don't know, I think it actually weakens the Constitution at the end of the day. But
You think it weakens the
yeah,
Constitution?
because if you don't carry out the spirit of the law and you just carry out the law verbatim, then it's practical only on a certain level as opposed to many different levels.
I guess so, but I don't know. I think that like we were like we said there was a difference between like the words of the Constitution and the Constitution as a whole. I think that would be strengthening the words of the Constitution rather than, so that's like the exact words, rather than the Constitution as a whole being something like that some people consider like a living, breathing document, like the Torah.
So I don't think that's what I read.
Can you say that again? I said that argument, that he made that decision based on the exact words, the exact words of the Constitution would strengthen just the words of the Constitution as you know, the writers, maybe the writers didn't even intend for it to be taken that way, but they somehow wrote it that way, and he wanted to make some kind of obvious observation about the Constitution in his opinion, and so he looked at the exact words, not what he tried to find, because he probably could have found meaning in reading the Constitution as a whole that would have made his opinion be different, but he chose to look at the exact words and the exact language that was used.
And so if you were to look at the question, is the Constitution weaker or stronger, do you think it'd be weaker or stronger?
I think that the Constitution would be, as a whole, weaker because he's not doing what, in my opinion, he's not doing what the Constitution was kind of like. I think the Constitution was meant to be interpreted. That's just my opinion. And I think that he's not doing that. But I think that in terms of the Constitution as just a document with words, he's strengthening the words of the document.
Just in Barron v. Baltimore and all?
Well, just in that case,
Okay.
but I mean, I'm sure we could find other examples of him doing that.
I'm just confused because every ruling that is made off of specific words. It's not like Barron.
That's true, but sometimes he kind of mold, for example, Marbury versus Madison, he kind of, remember when he was looking at the Judiciary Act, and he kind of didn't really read it the right way, in our opinion, in my opinion. He didn't really, it was kind of obvious that he was, taking it his own way, but he still made a relatively sound ruling, that people took for the real decision of the court, and so that was him kind of not using exact words, but using what he thought was right to do.
And that makes the Constitution stronger or weaker?
So I don't know why you guys are just asking me. So I think that made the those kinds of things make the Constitution stronger because it makes it more of a versatile document, but it makes the actual words of the Constitution seem weaker.
I think sort of what we're getting at and what Leo was getting at is there's a general inconsistency in how Marshall uses the Constitution. You get Barron v. Baltimore, where rather than the idea of the Constitution, he's just looking at the words. And you get Marbury v. Madison, where rather than looking at the words, he's looking at the general idea, even going to the extent of misquoting. And I think that in, what was the name, Martin versus Hunter's Lessee too, there's nothing that says that the Supreme Court can force lower courts to do what they want. Was that in the Constitution or the Judicial Act?
Section 27.
So the Judiciary Act, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court can force lower courts to do what they want, but he's thinking the general idea, what we've decided is the general idea. So I think that it really comes up that Marshall has these two different ideas and he just uses one or the other when he thinks that it would do what he wants, which I think would be an argument to say that it's weaker as a whole, because it's not someone with one consistent method of interpreting the Constitution saying this is how I feel that everything should, or this is how I feel that the conversation should go in the court, but rather in different situations so that the Supreme Court can make the decision that it wants. It's using the Constitution in different ways.
Yeah.
So your issues with the inconsistency, not having
Yeah.
a looser strict.
Yeah.
Is that just your issue with John Marshall, just his?
Well, I think whether the Marshall Court made it stronger, because I think it's up in the air of whether a strong Constitution is loose interpretation, actually being activated, or strict interpretation, just going for the actual words. And I think that if we're looking for the Marshall Court making it stronger, then there have to be just a straightforward way. This is how we do what we do in order to make the Constitution stronger. But based on the way that the court is doing what they want, rather than interpreting the Constitution one way across the board, I think it's making it weaker.
Yeah.
I just don't know. How can you have I don't know if I completely agree because I don't think I see these completely separate methods of interpreting. I just don't know what I'm just not understanding, because I feel that as though every decision he's made off of specific words in the Constitution and not just like this idea of the Constitution. I was like, well, I just feel like we're getting like a little too meta. Like, I don't know. Like, what are the two methods of interpretation? Could you elaborate on that?
I just think also it's like that like it's also interesting to note that outcome like what Perry was saying about inconsistency with Barron and Baltimore, you have like more state power versus like McCullough versus Maryland and like Fletcher versus Peck. Those all sort of give the federal government more power. So that's also part of the inconsistency that you're talking about, right?
I don't know, I think
Your inconsistency.
calling him an inconsistent like Supreme Court justice kind of implies that he's got the same mindset in every case that like that, or you think that he's one he's on a good day, one he's got some kind of thing. Like there's always some other factors. I think trying to figure out his opinion as a whole, or his court's opinion as a whole about whether they want to make the Constitution stronger or weaker, I don't think that's a good argument, because I think it goes case by case. Like one case, people are feeling a certain way, one case they're feeling another way, and whether or not that weakened or strengthened the Constitution, I don't think has to do with the court as a whole. I think it just has to do with what their outcome happened to be.
Speaking of a specific case, where the question of stronger or weak constitution is very relevant, is McCullough versus Maryland. So there's a few things. Like one is the implied powers, and that's in the Constitution. Like it says that Congress can, like Clause 19 says, is necessary and proper, and I know that's the other group, but whatever. Like, I don't know, and giving Congress, which is the legislative branch, like the power to execute, which is the executive branch's job, their laws, like, does that, like in this specific case, it might make the Constitution stronger because Congress can now regulate the money the way it's supposed to, but the impact that it potentially could have had, does that, I don't know.
But you think that the fact that he said there are implied powers makes the Constitution stronger? I think it makes it weaker.
What?
I think it makes it like weaker that he says that.
I'm saying it's a question.
Oh.
Just make sure I understand what you're asking, because I'll have to write the question on the board. Does strengthening Congress through the necessary and proper clause strengthen or weaken the Constitution?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it gives them more, like, the ability to, like, carry out their laws or whatever easier, but, like, that's, like, what's the purpose of the Constitution?
So,
Got it.
yeah, on that, I think like it's hard, like we're kind of just disagreeing on, or part of our disagreement is what it means for the Constitution to be stronger. And like I think we have to view it more as like the Constitution is what gives the federal government its powers, kind of. And like the courts like get all their power from the Constitution. So I think an easier way to look at it is, did Marshall make like the federal government more powerful?
But I don't think that I don't think that federal government's power is necessarily indicative of how strong the Constitution is. I think you could just as easily argue that a really strong federal government could undermine or weaken.
Especially because of the Bill of Rights, which
Yeah.
all of which are designed to limit the federal government.
Okay, so like how would you frame, like I feel like we need a new way to frame how is the Constitution stronger or less powerful, because it's like,
Say that out loud.
Well, I think you just to
Say that
intervene
loud,
for
Izzy.
1 second. I think Izzy is spot on in asking the question. Well, what is, and this is naturally, I think, in a seminar, these sorts of key definitions should emerge. What exactly is the purpose of the Constitution? I mean, I think that if you define, I'd be curious to hear from the group what the answer is. Because I think what you're saying, if I'm correct, is that if you can all, well, let's just see where that goes, because it's possible that everybody's bringing a different definition. Right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So go ahead, take it away.
Just to start, oh, sorry.
Was the Constitution like the biggest document that separated like America from being the colonies, and it like made us so that it was basically being like, these are all the things the government can't do because we don't want to have another monarchy, we don't want to have another like situation where there's a person, one singular person in charge of us. And I think the Constitution was really designed to make it so that the people had power too. And I think that with Marshall's Supreme Court taking the Constitution and like making it like their MO, it gives the people less power, and like that doesn't seem to me like the purpose of the Constitution.
Well, I would kind of beg to differ, because I think that it's really, the Constitution is stronger when there's someone who's enforcing the like rules and laws set up within the Constitution, and I think that is what the whole premise of like Marbury versus Madison did. Like Marbury versus Madison was like, we have rules in the Constitution and someone needs to be able to strike down a law that is unconstitutional. And that's kind of the whole premise of judicial review. I think the Constitution becomes weaker when something like Worcester v. Georgia happens, where a ruling comes out and the federal government says, oh, no, we're just not going to listen to you, and just actually defies a Supreme Court ruling.
But I think one of my issues personally with the Supreme Court is that they're not like elected, and they don't necessarily reflect the views of the people. I think that they would uphold the purpose of the Constitution better if they were an elected part of the government that like directly came from the people. But since like Marshall was kind of appointed like, because he like through like kind of a sideways way that didn't really like, he managed to get himself onto the Supreme Court, but that didn't really necessarily reflect what the majority of people in the US were feeling about like laws at that time. So that's why I think that it doesn't necessarily go with the purpose of the Constitution. I think there's a way it could, and like I do agree that it's stronger if people are enforcing it, but I don't know if it's enforced in the right way.
Yeah.
Can I just quick
Yeah, go.
Sorry. Just like a quick response, I actually think that the whole purpose of the Supreme Court is like that they're not elected, and that they are there not to like provide to the will of the people, but rather to whether the Constitution is being properly upheld.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was
Well, I
Oh,
really,
wait. I only have two possible purposes of the Constitution. I was trying to suss out what you were saying, what the purpose of the Constitution is, and I couldn't figure it out.
I feel like they're arguing about whether the Constitution should represent the people that it's written for, or whether it's preserving, like, what the ideal of the people is.
It's a more perfect union.
What they're striving to, or what they are. Is what they're, because like if they're elected,
So
then
Talia, do I have you? Do I understand you correctly in saying that the purpose one is to create a new distinct form of government as opposed to like Britain, and the other was to create an empowered people?
Yeah, but
Okay, great. Those are two, fine, possibly, but there are many other purposes of a constitution, and that I would imagine there are. What Ben? What do you think what's the purpose that you think it is, based on your argument? What was behind your argument?
I don't know if I was saying it clearly, but I think that the purpose of the Constitution, from my standpoint, is to establish a government and society on like a set basis of rules.
Like
that-
to establish American values.
Yeah, and then laws and rules can stem off of the base foundation of the Constitution.
could I just try to elaborate on what Talia said, or pose agreement? I think that you're right about sort of the electedness, because I think that the Constitution, sort of the reason why it's so hard to understand, because it poses two conflicting ideas. One is that the people should have power, and one is that the federal government should have power. And I think the reason why like elected people or like Congress or representatives is such sort of a good
You're gonna be the last voice. Go ahead.
is such a good like connection of that is because these is the federal government, but people chose them for what they're gonna say. So I think that's crucial in having a constitution for like actually following that compromise that the Constitution wants, is having people who were chosen by the people to decide what it says, because the Constitution is saying we both want a federal government which has these powers, but a federal government that's acting in favor of like what the states and the people want.